As Houthis continue their blockade against international shipping in the Red Sea, as Western forces are escalating in defense of international commerce. Last week, the Biden administration, alongside its European allies, launched a series of missile strikes on targets in Yemen in what they say is an effort to resolve the situation. However, on Monday, rebels launched an anti-ship ballistic missile, or several missiles, at Gibraltar Eagle, a U.S.-owned and operated container vessel, though there were no injuries and no significant damage. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak disconnected the Houthi issue with the Israel/Palestine conflict and said military action had to be taken against the Houthis or else risk the collapse of the rules-based order. Let's watch.
Mr. Speaker, we shouldn't fall for their malign narrative that this is about Israel and Gaza. They target ships from around the world. We continue to work towards a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza and to get more aid to civilians. We also continue to support a negotiated settlement in Yemen's civil war. But I want to be very clear that this action is completely unrelated to those issues. It is a direct response to the Houthis' attacks on international shipping. And we should also recognize the risks of inaction. It would weaken international security and the rule of law, further damage freedom of navigation in the global economy, and send a dangerous message that British vessels and British interests are fair game.
While the West is convinced that bombing the rebels into submission is the best way to reopen the Red Sea shipping lanes, our next guest disagrees. Dr. Trita Parsi wrote a new piece for Time arguing that there's a simple reason why U.S. strikes against the Houthis won't achieve their objective of reopening the Red Sea lanes. The Houthis don't have to succeed in striking additional commercial vessels. All that they need to do is try, because that's enough to sustain a de facto shipping blockade. Western commercial vessels will simply not risk moving their ships through those waters, not in spite of President Joe Biden's military strikes, but because of them. Here to discuss further is Dr. Trita Parsi. Welcome back to Rising.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining us. So they have fired on our ships. I mean, what is the argument for not, for not deploying the full might of the U.S. military to crush people who are attacking us and blocking international trade?
Well, certainly self-defense can be warranted, but we have to ask ourselves, what is the objective here? If the objective is to make sure that we are not under attack and that the shipping lanes remain open, the reality is that starting a war or this game of deterrence is not likely to succeed. It may feel right. It certainly will make a lot of people in Washington happy. But if the question is, we actually want to achieve the objective that we're setting out, which is to make sure that our ships are not attacked and that the shipping lanes are open, then this is not the likely path to success. In fact, what the British Prime Minister is saying is just patently false. The Houthis have made it quite clear that they will stop these attacks if a ceasefire is established in Gaza, meaning that the Israelis stop slaughtering people in Gaza. Now, we should not take that at face value, but we should take note that when there was a ceasefire, the attacks on the ships reduced significantly, only one that can actually be identified to the Houthis. So there seems to be a likelihood of success here. And the point is, we have to first exhaust all non-violent options to be able to achieve the objective of making sure that the ships are safe and the sea lanes are open before going towards military action. Biden has not done that because by his own admission, he did not raise the ceasefire in his last call with Netanyahu. He has vetoed 2 UN resolutions calling for pauses. And on top of that, he has also said publicly that he believes that a ceasefire is impossible. So the path towards actually effectively protect the ships and keeping the sea lanes open is the path that he seems to be least inclined to pursuing. And now we're risking a major war. And the question then is, how are we making ourselves safer by actually walking into a larger regional war? Mindful of the fact that the last wars we have had in the Middle East have been absolutely disastrous for the United States and for the region as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, the comparison that's been made is that we're getting this military escalation that many people are arguing is unconstitutional. Biden did not get congressional permission before he started this bombing campaign in order to defend a shipping route that largely implicates ships that are not U.S. military vessels. That's not the implication here. And ships that were allowed to pass as long as they weren't going to Israel. This was a blockade of Israel and the humanitarian defense. Arguably, that's the argument that the Yemenis are making of Palestine, and people are making comparisons to other kinds of humanitarian blockades and efforts to give humanitarian aid. In particular, this Turkish ship that attempted to bring humanitarian aid very famously to Gaza some years ago that was bombed by Israel. An American was killed, and certainly there was no discourse around the idea of America bombing Israel in defense. So I wonder if you can give us a picture of what you see as the real problem here in terms of the potential for escalating into a broader regional conflict.
Well, I mean, the bottom line problem is that the Biden administration is sacrificing almost everything, including tremendously important U.S. interests, to allow Israel to continue the slaughter in Gaza. And the question we have to ask ourselves, what is it in Israel's continued bombardment of Gaza that is so important for the United States as our interest that it warrants the risks that the administration is now accepting? Compare ourselves to where we are today to 3 months ago. Look at how much closer we are to a larger regional war. And for what? So that the Israelis can continue to bombard Gaza and slaughter people there, despite the fact that their own press increasingly is writing that they're failing and that they're not succeeding in taking out Hamas. And the former Israeli prime minister himself put it quite bluntly in the pages of Haaretz, saying that the chances of defeating Hamas militarily in the manner that Netanyahu set out is actually at nil. So why are we doing this? Why are we risking a war that would drag the U.S. Into it, that will have more American body bags coming home for the region, simply in order to allow the Israelis to continue to bombard Gaza, not achieving the objectives that they themselves have set up?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I want us to be less involved in the Middle East, and certainly not, our wars there going so disastrously in the past, which is why I, have absolutely support cutting off aid independent of to Israel, independent of the situation there. But the issue with the Houthis, of course, is they have attacked us. Now, obviously, under the Constitution, does not give the executive, and should not. In fact, we've given too much power to the executive to wage a unilateral war without authority from Congress. But my understanding is defensively, the president can respond, can order retaliatory defensive action in a limited capacity, not for an unlimited period of time before Congress can intervene. And maybe there's a debate over the limits of that or the extent to that. Can you talk about this aspect of our battle now with these Yemeni rebels?
Well, I think, first of all, if my understanding is correct, the attacks on shipping by the Houthis prior to the U.S. attack was actually not American ships. So we intervened in order to keep the sea lanes open, not because our own ships had been attacked. The attack that came against the American ship happened, if I'm not mistaken, a day or two ago after the U.S. started striking the Houthis. Now, let's take your argument, because I think there's validity to it. After there has been an attack, there is a legitimacy for striking and defending. That has now already happened. There's been 2 rounds of strikes by the United States. It's not going to achieve the larger objective, but it may be able to say, okay, we struck back. What now then? Why not take a step back and actually pursue the thing that is more likely to succeed, which is to have a ceasefire, which has also several other very positive side effects. First of all, it will stop the attacks by the Iraqi militias against the United States. It will pacify the Israeli-Lebanese border. It will reduce the risk of a broader war that we absolutely do not need. It will help release the Israeli hostages held by Hamas, because the only time they have been released is through a ceasefire. And perhaps most importantly, it will end what the South Africans in the International Criminal Court or a Court of Justice are calling a genocide. Yet we're not pursuing that option, and instead we're incrementally getting closer and closer to a larger conflict because the incremental steps appear justified because what the other side did. That's the fallacy we should not fall for. We should think about how do we actually achieve our strategic objectives rather than just tactically reacting to what the other side is doing.
Dr. Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.